Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Economist Corporate Network event live from Singapore. My name is Andy Staples. I'm the editorial director of the Economist Corporate Network. Today, our theme is looking at talent, tech, and transformation. And I'm delighted to be joined by a number of speakers who are going to be sharing their insights and expertise on this theme as well. Just in terms of format for this morning, we have three key sections to go through over the next sort of hour and a half or so. I'm going to be sharing some of the key findings of a new paper that we're releasing today, and then we'll be moving into a panel discussion. In the final section, I'll be joined by a further speaker who's dialing in from Kuala Lumpur, and we'll have a few minutes of comment and reflection on the discussion that we're going to have this morning, and then we'll wrap up. Just to bring your attention to Slido, and you can see the details there up on your screen. Please go to slido.com and enter those details. You'll be able to see a short poll there. We've got 4 questions to ask you, and very happy if you could fill those in for us as we're going through over the next few minutes. We'll come back to look at those results a little bit later on. You can also use the Slido platform to send in any questions and comments that you might have to our panel and to myself as well. As ever, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So please do think about questions as we go through the morning and send them through. So let me just get us underway, and hopefully you can see on your screen there some shots of papers that we've been doing over the years. We've generally turned this to the Talent Project, which we kicked off about 6 years ago. And every year we've taken the opportunity to survey all of our members, all of you across Asia, on themes related to talent and technology. And most importantly, we really wanted to talk to business leaders to get their sense from their perspectives running businesses about issues related to talent development, technology, and so on. So you can see a number of the papers that we've done over the years. And over the past couple of years, we focused a lot more on issues related to the future of work, so AI, automation, and so on. And this last paper that we're releasing today, Talent, Tech and Transformation, really focuses in, I think, takes some of the things that we've been looking at over the past few years and bring them together in one place as well. I should also note that we ran this survey, many of you will recall doing this survey, back in March of this year, or end of February actually is when we ran the survey. And as you all know, that was just prior to everything shutting down as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So 2 points there. One is that it's a really interesting snapshot of how people were thinking about these issues just before we had the whole crisis. And secondly, it's an opportunity today to come back and revisit those issues, particularly through discussion with our guests here in the studio about what's changed over the last 3 months and how that's going to impact and shape business operations going forward as well. So I'm just going to go through a few slides, which are basically drawing some graphics from the paper itself. But just before we get there, these are the sort of guiding questions that we had for the paper itself, for the survey, and the follow-up interviews that we did with people. We really wanted to sort of dig into this issue of how future-ready you feel that your workforce is. We wanted to look at the skills requirements, skills gaps, how you're filling those gaps as well, what you're doing with your existing workforce, how you're rejuvenating your existing workforce through training and development, for example. And there's a final section looking at how you as business leaders are actually leading this transformation. Or are you? Are you delegating that to somebody else in the organization as well? So those are the sort of key themes that we wanted to have a look at. And let me take you through some of the key findings now. So this first chart that we have up here, I think just sort of sets the scene a little bit. We wanted to know what's driving your digital transformation. What are the key reasons for you to undertake this type of journey? And as you'll be able to see there on the left-hand side, to remain competitive, to drive innovation within the organization are the key drivers. And interestingly, if you go right across to the other side of the screen, reducing costs seems to be much less important. So that's an interesting one, because we hear a lot about people implementing technology to save labor, to reduce costs and so on. But our survey is telling us that that's less important. So something that we can come back to a little bit later on. The next slide that you'll see here, there's two graphics on here, and this is really starting to get into perceptions or how confident you feel your workforce is at the moment. So the top one here, we asked the question, I could confidently describe my workforce as future ready. And what we have here is a majority, so just under 60% of people agreeing with that statement. But you'll see in that top bar there, only 6.6% of respondents could strongly agree to this. And this may be something that we'll come back to as we go through these next few slides and the discussion this morning. It seems that that's a relatively low degree of confidence in the workforce that you have at the moment. And so what steps are you taking to improve that? And if you look at the second bar at the bottom of the screen there, we'll be looking at, in terms of where you are on that journey of developing a future-ready workforce. In other words, a workforce that's ready and able to utilize all the tools and technologies that are available on the market to help you rebuild your organization and take it forward. And so we asked this question a few years ago as well in terms of where people sit on a curve. 17% there saying that they are ahead of the curve, just under half, 44% saying that they're keeping up with peers. But then you've got just over a third, just under 40% actually, who are at a relatively early stage on this. And it's interesting to see how this changes over the years. And if you dig in to some of the reasons why people think that they're ahead of the curves, of course, we see a lot of the tech companies in that component there, and financial services, for example. And as we move towards the right of the screen there, you get some companies in some of them in more traditional sectors with legacy systems, for example, that are taking a bit longer to affect that change. As I move on to the next slide here, this is looking at degree of confidence in terms of the workforce that you have today and allowing you as the business leader to deliver on strategy. So you can see that that curve there with about half of the respondents in this sort of middle to top end scoring 6 or 7, and the grade here is 0, no confidence, right the way up to 10, highly confident in the workforce. So on the one hand, that seems to be a relatively decent distribution. Most of the respondents are 5 and above, but that still leads about 20-something% who are well below the average. And these, I think, reflecting some of the challenges that people have when they look at their workforce and they think about the question, is this the team that I have in place that's going to help me deliver on the strategy that's my key responsibility? And finally, then, in this first section on building a future-ready workforce, we asked a question about investing, and you can see here roughly an even split, 48% saying that they feel that they're investing at the right rate, 50% saying too little. And this is something that we can come back to a little bit later on, particularly in the context of a post-COVID environment with all of the challenges and opportunities that that's presented. So that was in way of sort of setting the scene a little bit, thinking about your future-ready workforce. And then let's get a little bit more detailed and dig into issues related to skills and training. So two charts that we have up here. On the left-hand side here, you see that pie chart. So we asked the question, do you have a skills gap in your company between the skills and attributes that you need now to be able to deliver on strategy? And a strong majority, 85% or so there, saying that yes, there is some kind of skills gap within our organization. And I don't think this is anything too shocking. We know that there's a very tight war for talent in the marketplace. We know that the type of skills that people are in high demand are changing quite rapidly as well. So it's natural that there's going to be some kind of gap between the workforce that you have at the moment, unless you're a startup company, and what you need to be able to deliver on strategy. And then getting a bit more detail on the right-hand side of the screen here. So how are you primarily addressing these skills gaps? And I think if you look at these columns on the left-hand side of that chart here, so the first one there is investing in training to reskill, upskill the existing workforce. That seems to be the most common response there. And the second column there, recruiting for new permanent staff with the required skills. So those two key areas. if you jump across to the right-hand side of the screen there, we asked the question, are you using the gig economy or contractors with specialist skills? And you'll see that big sort of orange component. That's people saying that this is less important. So that's interesting, because we've heard a lot about the sort of gig economy in recent years and how that's building in flexibility, but it still seems that the focus is very much on the workforce that you have at the moment, retaining them and making sure that you're investing in the skills that they need, and then of course seeking new talent for the marketplace. Coming on to the next slide, and this gets a little bit more focused on the existing workforce and what efforts are you making there. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, increased training and development opportunities, so increased budgets, increased use of professional training organisations to come in and help you with all of that, and a much more of a focus on the individual as well, individual development plans. So thinking about the people that you have at the moment, what skills do they need? Where are the gaps that need to be filled for that particular employee, and building the training and development program around the person rather than the organisation. And then you can see some less important responses over here, maybe something of concern for the government in Singapore. Participation in government schemes, only 13% of respondents across the region said that. Maybe it's a little bit higher here. We're taught to our guests that are both headquartered here a little bit later on, and maybe that's one issue we can look at there. And then moving on to the next couple of charts. So we've got two pie charts here. And, you know, no surprises. We've asked this every year for the past 6 or 7 years, and there are no shortage of surveys out there about people skills and digital skills. So we asked these two questions. People skills are increasingly important to the success of my business, and a very large majority saying yes, of course they are. But interestingly, if you look at the dark blue colour there, 81% saying they strongly agree with the people skills component. If you jump across to the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that that number drops down to about 57%. So yes, of course, people skills and digital skills are very important, but it still seems that people skills are beating out the digital skills at the moment. And again, that's something interesting, something that we can come back to a little bit later on. If you look at the paper, which is available for download from today, part of our analysis there is that the technology gets so advanced that it becomes something that it becomes ubiquitous, that we don't actually interact with it, that it's just there in the same way that infrastructure is. And so therefore, it's less of a need on the people with those really hard digital skills. Of course, we need those in the organization, but most of the people in the company are going to be relying much more on their people skills. And again, that's something I think has become more important over the last few months. Moving on to, I think, the final slides in this section around skills and training. Again, two charts. The pie chart on the left-hand side of the screen. We're thinking about how you go about developing the skills. And what's been very clear, I think, in some of the papers that we've done over the past few years, is that we don't do this alone, that we look to build a wider ecosystem or network of partners that can help us develop the skills that we need. And so we asked that type of question, and you'll see there that the vast majority, just about 3/4 of respondents saying that they agree with that statement, that they are looking to build a wider ecosystem. And then getting a little bit more granular, on the right-hand side of the screen there, you'll see that we asked, well, who's in your network? And people could select from a number of responses there. And technology providers and universities right at the top, which we'll come back to universities a little bit later on when we bring in our final speaker. But technology providers, I think, is also an interesting one as well, as many tech providers move away from hardware to software and then services and cloud. Of course, they want to get involved in that, in helping their clients to utilize that technology as well, and move into areas where perhaps they haven't had so much experience in their traditional business models. Okay, so then finally, moving on to a section which focuses on much more on the individual business leader. So we wanted to find out more about how you are driving or delegating when it comes to leading the transformation. So first question there on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see when it comes to ensuring that the workforce has the necessary skills to allow you to execute on strategy, do you drive or do you delegate? and 73% they're saying that they're driving that process. Now, this is interesting. Again, if you go to the paper, you'll see that I reference an earlier report that we did in 2015, where we asked pretty much exactly the same question, and the response that we got there, 55%, I think it was saying that they delegated that process, and they were delegating it to HR heads, maybe to the CTO, to CIOs as well. Of course, it's not completely like for like. There's a 5-year difference in time in asking this question. We'll have different people responding to the question as well. But that does seem to be quite a significant shift from people taking more ownership of this need to get involved in developing a future-ready workforce. Moving across to the right-hand side of the screen, we asked some more follow-up questions around this. And so this next one was thinking about your senior leadership team. And again, we had a whole paper on this, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, to look at this in some detail. But we posed the question, are you confident that your senior leadership team are transformation champions? Because we know that leading from the front, that supporting everybody from bottom up, but from top down as well, is very important. And therefore, all of your team needs to be transformation champions. So the vast majority of people there are agreeing that that's the case, but just under 30%, so only 30% are strongly agreeing with that statement as well. And that's maybe an area that we can look at as well in terms of making sure that everybody's on the same message, that they're promoting the same vision that you have in terms of building your talent. Moving on to the next slide. This is an issue that we come across quite often. We've had plenty of meetings where we look at the realities of driving a digital transformation within the organization. And of course, there's always challenges. There is also resistance to change as well. So we wanted to dig into that a little bit in a bit more detail. And we posed these questions. What internal challenges are you facing in terms of developing your future-ready workforce? And if you go to the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see this resistance to change mindset. And this is something that comes up time and again. It's not so much the technology. It's less about getting the buy-in from the board in terms of investment and so on. It's about individuals, and more specifically, it's about the mindset that they have as well, which leads then to a whole sort of set of questions about how do you change that mindset? How do you get people on board? How do you get people pulling together and in the same direction? So mindset being the first one, and the second biggest response there, pace of change too slow. And again, I think one of the lessons over the last 3-4 months or so has been that COVID has led to a demand or an imperative for us to accelerate the pace of change as well, for reasons around resilience and agility, for example. And then you get into that sort of middle section there about the organizational structure, about a lack of buy-in, corporate culture. These seems to be less important. And if you go right over to the right-hand side, nobody's complaining, or very few people complaining that the pace of change is too fast. And interestingly there, if you look at that chart on the right-hand side, 11.5% of people saying that the fear of technology will take jobs is an issue. But so, in other words, a vast majority of people saying that that's not an issue. So all of those debates that we had about AI taking jobs, that doesn't seem to be coming through as a challenge in driving transformation at the moment. And I think one or two more charts to wrap this up. Okay, so you've identified some of the challenges that you're facing, a resistance to change mindset being the top one there. So what are you doing about that? How are you overcoming these challenges? And interestingly, here the biggest response there, just over 3/4 of people saying constant communication. And I know that this is one of the things that we can discuss in a moment with our speakers. And then moving on down, having a dedicated team to focus on transformation initiatives, sharing success stories. So all of this really coming back to communication. It's less about the technology itself. It's about getting people on board, showing them how this is going to transform the business, where it's taking them, and why you're doing this. Okay, so let me just take a pause there as we then move into our panel discussion. So what I've done is just given you a little bit of background about the paper that we're releasing today. And just to recap, we wanted to look at where we are with that sort of future-ready workforce, what types of skills and training we need in order to realise that vision, and finally, what's the role of the business leader in leading that? Are they in fact leading that or delegating? So, with that in hand, I'm now going to turn to my guests here with me in Singapore. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a terrible day. It's raining heavily outside, so we're not getting that lovely view of the Singapore skyline. But thank you very much for joining us. And let me just introduce my guests. So immediately left to me, we have Mahesh Iyer, who is the CEO of Growth Markets for Signify. That you might know previously as Philips Lighting. And when we say growth markets, I was looking at Mahesh's details just yesterday. That's a huge territory you have: Japan, Korea, ASEAN, Pacific, India, Middle East, Turkey, Pakistan, and Africa. So Mahesh, thank you very much for joining us. And we're also joined by Uma Thana Balasingham, who is the Vice President, Channel Chief for Asia Pacific and Japan at VMware. And also I should note, and maybe we'll come back to this a little bit later on, one of the founders of Lean In Singapore as well. So thank you very much both for joining us. Mahesh, maybe if I could come to you first. So I've just been running through the findings of this paper. I know that you've been to many of the meetings that we have here in Singapore, looking at digital transformation, looking at talent as well. Yep. Maybe if I could just get your initial thoughts on what we've been sharing, and then we can get into a bit of a conversation about how you've been involved in talent development, what you've been seeing particularly over the last few months as a result of the COVID crisis. But perhaps before we get there, but if you could get us a little bit more sense of who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So I head up growth markets for Signify, as you rightly said. It's basically Asia Pacific except China plus Middle East and Africa, so it's a large beat. But I think for me, the entire piece on transformation and tech is very, very key. Now, I work in lighting, and you can consider that lighting is a very, very boring world. You had a bulb and you changed it. And that was our business model for many years, right? But then we had three major transformations the last 2 decades. The first one, of course, from moving from conventional light sources towards much more energy efficient or LED, right? So that saved you energy, very good for the planet. But if you didn't play it carefully, you could kill your own future revenue, because in the old days of the bulbs, you sold one, next year it failed, you sold another, and it was all about distribution or replacement. But with LEDs, they now last 8 years, 10 years. So basically, you could kill your own future revenue stream, right? So that's one piece of that. How can we utilize LEDs to actually drive our own business? So that's one of the transformations we had to go through, that one. Second was moving towards much more connected systems. Obviously, the fact that there is far more interconnected systems, IoT, how can we have lighting play a part? Because the advantage of lighting is so that's the part we are at the moment undergoing. And the third one, as we are starting to work much more, is how do we take lighting beyond illumination? So here we are talking about things like, hey, can I have Wi-Fi, which will have light can carry data, and also therefore help offices, cities manage their entire systems. So for us, it was a huge transformation, and obviously it's not been easy, and that's something that we've been working on. And if I had to take a couple of pieces, in the end for us, it was indeed about building skills, because people do in our company have extensive knowledge about customers, applications, that's key. But we had to inculcate software. We are classically a traditional hardware company, right? And the last 5 to 7 years, we had to change. And some part of it was build, some part of it was buy, some part was borrow. Go to partners, get some more talent, buy talent in some cases, because now we had to switch from selling a product to selling solutions and services, something we're completely not familiar with. And that's what we've been going about doing. I would say we are probably about 70% on our journey. Fascinating journey, still some way to go. But as we go along, we start to realize that, hey, with the LED technology, the fact that it can be easily controlled, it can actually play with terms of lights, and more importantly, work with the overall other systems, be it city management or building management systems, it starts to lend us to be much more amenable to our customers, because this is exactly what they seek. So you don't sell light bulbs anymore, don't lighting anymore. You're now selling lighting for 10 years. Hey, I can give you a safe city for 7 years. City council, listen to me. So I think that's been a fascinating journey of how we have transformed and how tech in that sense has been a very, very key part for us.
Just on that point, though, because we hear a lot about business transformations. We hear about people needing to move from what they've been doing traditionally to realizing the market change of new technologies and capacities and so on, and reimagining that business model. And what you just described there is, I think, is a very clear example. What has that meant in terms of the people that you have in the organisation, and how have you you talked about that journey, 70% or so along that journey. What has that meant in terms of your, and how have you gone from there to here?
I think it's okay. It's not been an easy journey, because I think people are the most important piece in this. They need to be convinced that the change is important, right? Because they've seen for many years that the model that they worked with worked. And now as you start to get to the new world, they do realize there are challenges. So I think a lot of, for me, has been to try and say, this is very, very strategic for the company, because it's existential. If we don't get into solutions and services and software, we might as well be passing in probably 10 years. So that was one part of the communication, why it is strategically important. The second part was really about saying, hey, this journey is on. It doesn't mean all of you are redundant. Actually, we can reskill you as well. Because you bring in information about applications, you still have great knowledge with customers, you have the links. What we will equip you with other stuff, for example, okay, how do you use technology to your own advantage, right? And in some cases, complementary skills by getting it side. So we did get in people from the IT telecom industry who are very, very familiar with this kind of business. How do you talk to CIOs instead of CPOs, right? How do you build in software for the R&D people so that the products can still work well? So it's a part of convincing people, hey, this is the journey we are on. Don't worry, we will equip you with the skills, and we will be successful because we are trying to also bring in more people who have the requisite knowledge. So I think it's a lot about it, and continuous communication. I have to say, when I talk about 70%, I'm talking 3 years so far. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's still a long journey, and communication is very, very key. You have to say this 5 times, 7 times, 10 times. But transformation in the end is only possible when people believe in it and are willing to go on the journey.
So the results of the survey that I was sharing a little bit earlier on, the resistance to change mindset, the need for constant communication, these are all things that resonate with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me, the transformation in the end is about people, because the company is really about people. So they have to accept that there will be change. And they're only convinced once they understand and buy the vision. And that's the only way to do that is just constant communication. And of course, proof in terms of, ensuring they actually get the training. It's not just talk anymore. And one of the key things you have to do as a leader, and I have to do, is, hey, I'm not necessarily digitally savvy, but you start to inculcate some skills, saying, hey, I can do this, my boss can do it, why can't I? So you have to sometimes lead by example, even in territories where you're not familiar with. Right? And that's basically the way the transformation occurs.
And just one final point, we'll come back to some of these things a little bit later on, but you mentioned there about build, buy and borrow, and bringing people in from telcos. Could you give us a bit more detail about that, and why you brought them in and how that was indicated?
Sure enough. So I'll take an example of cities, right? In the old days, we used to sell street lights, and we still do, which is typically a fixture. But now when you go to the city council, you want to integrate it with the city management software. So we have now switched from selling just fixtures to selling lighting for 7 years, safe lighting for the city for 7 years. Now, the only way you can make that work is with a software platform in the background, right? So how do you control the lights? How can you actually use sensors, right, to indicate, okay, whether the light is working or not? But importantly, you can also use it for other things like studying traffic patterns, air pollution, if you will. So suddenly that light fixture has far more information that it can collect and process for you than otherwise. But it has to be backed by a very, very strong software platform. So when you go through this journey, then you start to realize that you can't do all of it, and you need partners. So for sure, cloud computing becomes very, very key, because most of our solutions are on the cloud. That makes it most easy to manage. Second is you need partners who are doing things like sensors, who are very familiar with these pieces. Third, back on software itself, how do you do data analytics? How do you ensure that your software works in an interconnectable way to most other systems? So it has to talk to the HVAC system, it has to talk to the city management software. So there we had to go and buy some of this talent, because these are people who bring it innate, right? So there we didn't try to equip, because it would take us too long. So here we bought The borrow part for me is really the entire ecosystem where we utilize some of our alliances to bring in the skills that we don't have. They have an advantage that we bring in access to places because lighting is everywhere. And in turn, we enable them to improve their own services. So that was the kind of alliances we formed with 2 or 3 other companies as well, which has benefited us. The advantage then for the customer, because I think it's all about being competitive and innovative, which I think were the 2 critical ones on the survey, is the city suddenly says, you know what, this is much easier for me because you are helping me integrate the entire city management software system. I don't need to worry about getting lighting separate specifically, or I don't need to worry about managing my traffic separately. These can be seamlessly operated. And then for that to happen, this will be, it's only possible when companies ally together. So for me, that's a very, very critical that this only works with ecosystems, and therefore like cloud computing, data analytics, partnering with fellow companies who are interested in connected systems, smart city, those are all very, very key.
Excellent, thank you very much. Uma, if I could come to you, and I think what we need to dig into a little bit more is about VMware, about what you guys do, and about your role within that as well. Mahesh has been talking about that sort of shift in business model as being sort of central in driving a change in people within the organisation, bringing in talent, looking for partners as well, as something that was picked up in the survey. So. Could you give us a little bit more background about VMware, about your role within that, and then some of these things?
Sure. So we're close to 22 years old. We're a US-based company, and we see our role as really that ubiquitous digital foundation that we give to customers, bringing together the world of operations and developers in a consistent environment that's going to allow them to accelerate innovation. And the way that we do that is to bring the ability for any customer to run any application on any cloud, on any device, securely and through networking. And we see our jobs at VMware as helping customers to be on the right side of technology. And we talk about the 4 superpowers of technology, and Mahesh kind of talked about some of them. So the first one is around artificial intelligence and machine learning, which you captured in your study. And that's an overnight 30-year success, I would say, simply because the technology has matured and we have enough data to glean insights and intelligence from it. And then cloud, unimaginable scale. You and I could go build a supercomputer this weekend on a Visa or MasterCard. And if we borrowed Michael Dell's Amex card, we could probably build the world's biggest supercomputer this weekend, right? And then IoT and edge, right? The ability to bring your physical and digital worlds together. And mobile, with over 60% of the world now that has a consistent mobile connection, just giving you different access to customers today. And so our role is to really harness the power of software in order to do that and be on the right side of technology so that customers can really lift and accelerate their business. Now, my role here in Asia Pacific and Japan, and for us that covers 48 markets, is with our partner ecosystem. So we work with about 8,000 partners here in Asia Pacific and Japan, and we've really built our install base exclusively with them. So our dependency on working with partners across Asia is massive. And you talk a little bit about that in your paper as well, and that dependency, I think, has increased with the current normal that we're working on.
So that, we captured in there the increasing need to build the ecosystem, to work with partners and so on. Interestingly, part of that was in terms of bringing in the skills and experience that you need as well. So it's not only helping your clients with utilizing technology. Do you get involved with helping their organization as well in terms of the talent that they have within the organization to access this technology? Is that a part of how you see your role as a partner?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have very different sets of partners. And, there used to be a very traditional way of describing partners in the tech world before. You might have been a value-added reseller or a systems integrator or a distributor, etc. Now, those lines are very much blurred today. And, our partners are also our customers today in terms of taking our technology and bringing that as a service to their set of customers. So we do work with them in many different types of routes to market. And, a great example in terms of how we're driving innovation with partners in emerging markets, for example, in Thailand, where we have a customer called Nimbus, which is a startup that's providing inventory management as a service, really looking at, with Thailand 4.0, actually over 20,000 of retail wholesalers are still, working on pen and paper as they take orders, and probably the owners are the only ones who know the 3,000 prices on the shelf in their shops and in their retail branches. And with working with one of our cloud partners in Thailand, they were able to bring digital transformation at a very affordable price of 33 baht per day, so that's US $1 per day, to these wholesalers so that they can do inventory management, change pricing, manage their retail branches on the cloud, and doing it affordably, right? Reducing the cost of doing business by 40%, but also helping to future-proof these wholesalers in Thailand.
Yeah. Let's bring the focus on internally on the organisation itself, because we're asking a lot about the type of skills that people need. And your company, tech company, so you're going to have a lot of people with those skills. What's that sort of journey like? If we were to be asking you the question about how future ready is your own workforce, where are you on that journey? What efforts are you taking? I wonder if you could give us a bit of an insight into a tech company and how that resonates there.
Yeah. So we have a leadership code in VMware, and it really divides into what our values are, what's our mindset, and what are the skills. And actually, one of the most recent changes we made in our mindset was changing the word resilience to grit. And in that, we are saying that you need to bring passion along with perseverance and having a very clear point of view in terms of where you want to go, and having that consistency, endurance, and tenacity together. And I would say, we pivoted very quickly. Back in March, we were supposed to bring our entire sales organization here in Singapore for a virtual kickoff, and we pivoted that very quickly to an online environment of close to 2,000 people. We also are getting our executives. So Pat Gelsinger is our CEO, and last year was voted by Glassdoor as the best CEO in the world. Now Pat and the executive team are doing much more in that communication piece in your survey, in reaching out to our team. So a lot more town halls and what Pat calls Zoom bombing, where, as soon as he's finishing with the media in Australia, he's Zoom bombing a Brazilian meeting and saying hi. Now that would have been impossible for him to do before. And so we're doing a lot more executive engagements as part of that. And he's actually pivoting, this week I'm going to work in the European time zone, and then next week I'm going to work in the Asia time zone to support our partners and customers. And then last but not least, we're also seeing it in terms of our talent. And one very interesting thing that we saw last week in Japan is because as we think about innovation, diversity is going to be important. And part of that diversity focus in VMware is bringing in new talent. And we bring in new college graduates from universities. And usually we see last year about 71 females show up at the first interview. But this round we saw 205. Wow. And actually we've increased our intake of female new college graduates in Japan now from 21% to 52%. And we're actually digging deeper into that. Now, outside of the fact that they didn't have to show up to an interview physically and everything was done virtually, including the application, we're trying to see what lessons we can learn from that.
Very interesting. About 5 years ago, we had a meeting in Japan looking at diversity in Japan, looking at technology, and looking at women as well. And we had a speaker in from Dell who were basically saying, we do work from home. This is one of the things that we try to help our clients with, and we do that internally. And the vast majority of their new intake were women who needed more flexibility in working arrangements because travel, childcare, elder care, these type of areas. So that's very interesting sort of topic. I suggest remind everybody that we do have the Slido poll, and we'll be coming to those results in a few moments. But I want to continue on this vein of what's been changing over the last three months. And Mahesh, we talked earlier a little bit on the issue of training, for example. You were talking in the survey, we talked about rejuvenating the existing workforce and so on. There seems to be more of a focus on investing in training development, individual plans and so on. But in this particular context of the last 3 months or so, you heard about the pivot there. What's been happening with Signify?
Yeah, I think with the COVID syndrome, the positive thing about it, it has forced us to accelerate our entire digital transformation. So if I talk specifically on learning, and I'll take the most difficult people, which is the sales guys, right? These are the guys who bring the business, but they also sometimes are the most ones who are most happy with their customer relationship, the fact that there always has to be a one-on-one and so on. And it does work. I'm not saying it doesn't, it works very well. But with COVID, they couldn't do those calls anymore, right? So we had to equip them to say, okay, now how do you make a virtual call? Second one, how do you do webinars rather than a face-to-face presentation? Now, these are skills we had to build overnight, and which we did. And I mean, I'm glad that we have something called Learning at Signify, which is like a digital university. So it's personalized courses. So you can choose the course you want, because what we've realized is if you put many people into a classroom, some are interested, some are not, and there are different topics, right? So, but if you make a personalized training, you can choose the topic you want training on. It happens to be online, that's useful. With COVID, we are very, very glad we had done it, because I think we would have struggled quite a bit if we hadn't. So sales guys suddenly start to learn about how to make a virtual call, because we still held them and said, you know what, customer contact is important. You still need to make your 3 to 4 calls a day. Now you make them virtually. Helped because the customers felt engaged too, because they have the same problem. They're also isolated, right? So they want to know what's more happening in terms of information. They were very happy to get the calls. Second aspect, how do you use suddenly your call register more? So Salesforce.com, how do you register your projects? Far more use in terms of interaction and software skills. And there we had to, it's worked very well, that they had to really start upscaling themselves from their traditional selling style to far more way of digital working. And I see that as beneficial, because even when we move out of COVID and physical contact is managed anymore, I can still see that some of these calls are useful because A, they can increase the efficiency in terms of calling. Second is get an audience, especially for webinars. We've got audiences who are really only interested in the topic. So we've got 300, 400 people on a webinar, whereas if we went to a seminar, you could get 100 odd people, half of them thinking coffee and half of them thinking lunch. But this one 1 hour, very, very focused, people really interested in the topic. So for us, reskilling in terms of Salesforce on how do you manage a situation like this has been beneficial, and I see that those benefits going across. Yeah. Ditto with R&D. I think R&D had to pick up software skills, which they have. And I mean, the fact that many of the meetings are digital, the work from anywhere has become a very, very useful concept. I think for me, that basically means that, especially on an ecosystem, you could go to any partner anywhere. You don't have to worry about saying this person is going to be in Singapore. It can be anywhere. So you can bring in some of those skills as well. So in many ways, COVID has been a challenge to business, but in other ways, has fast-forwarded us on the digital transformation, because suddenly we know how to use tools, we are forced to use tools, and we're finding actually it works. So,
and if I could stay on that same area of what's changed, and maybe if you had some comment on the sort of training aspect of that as well, because it has been it's been a crisis, but it's forced people to accelerate and think again, to look differently at how they're delivering training, how they're interacting with clients and so on. What's been the experience at VMware?
Yeah. So at the kickoff, one of the trainings that we provided, and there's many modules that come beneath it, is about effectively working in a virtual environment. And actually what we do there is really focusing on this concept that right now you can't be dependent on the hierarchical structure, that to wait for the instructions to come from the top to you, but have the skill and ability to manage up, down, and across, and work with multiple stakeholders in a company the size of ours, and be able to connect the dots and deliver the outcome. And, part of that is also, as we look at talent, we no longer have those metrics, but it is about looking at candidates that are leading edge, versatile, for example. And so what I just talked about is really putting someone in the box of versatile. Because as we look at talent going forward, it may not necessarily be just about hiring somebody in the country where the role exists today. So back to what Mahesh is saying, we do say that everyone in VMware as a salesperson now becomes an inside sales rep. And so the way that we communicate with customers also needs to be more deliberate because you've got a certain amount of time. You need to get your point across with clarity and get to the outcomes because previously you might have a physical meeting and allow that dialogue to flow. That's no longer the luxury because there is a Zoom fatigue. We use Zoom as a platform. And so the way you organize and manage those meetings has also changed. So those are some of the things that we look at.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to remind everybody of the Slido poll that we have, and also that's an opportunity for people to be sending in some questions as well. Hopefully we've got the technology sorted out, and on the screen you'll be able to see the responses that we've had so far. And let's just have a look at these. So all of these questions we really wanted to sort of update on where we are as a result of COVID. So the first one there, as a result of the pandemic, do you plan to accelerate efforts to develop a future-ready workforce? And 56% there saying that they do. Strongly agree, another 37% saying that they somewhat agree. So certainly some, as we've heard from both of you, but also from this quick poll here, that things are going to be accelerated. The next question that we had up there was, in light of the pandemic, do you think that your investment in developing a future-ready workforce is about right or too little? And interesting, just under 6% saying not enough. So that suggests, go back to that poll that we had in the paper as well, it was a sort of roughly, I think 48-50% we're investing at the right pace or not enough. It seems that there might be some more investment coming down the pipe in recognition of a need to accelerate things. How does that bring with you? Do you see within the organisation that you're going to be putting a bit more money into accelerating the development of your future-ready workforce, or I guess in terms of talent in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking at many different ways to drive diversity. So, for example, we did recently introduce that in our pipeline of candidates, not only do you have to have a gender diversity, but also race. And so that's a change that we made recently. And one of the examples that we have here in Asia Pacific is in India, where just before last year, we launched Project Tara, and Tara means star in Hindi, where we know that over 50% of females who graduate in technology actually drop out of the workforce because they have, home commitments, etc. And so we launched Project Tara, where we aim to bring up to 15,000 women in India back to work. And what we're putting them through is free VMware digital transformation certifications so that they have the confidence, their skills are relevant. And we work with partners like NTT last week who announced their commitment to partner with VMware in order to hire this woman once they're back. And I think these are some of the things that we're doing in terms of ensuring that our workforce is future ready, because the diversity is going to be a big part of that diversity of thought as we continue to innovate ourselves, but also bring innovation to customers. That's going to be key.
Yeah. Same question on that sort of pace of investment.
Absolutely. I think it'll increase because I think the advantage with the fact that the last 3 months have proven that you can actually do that with speed. Earlier, I think most of the investments, be it in people or future-ready workforce, was, are we ready for it? Is it really worth it? But this has now shown that it is worth it because it has happened. So for Signify, as different from VMware, it will be much more about reskilling. So that's the part we will work on much more, because what we've, again, come back to realize is virtual ways of selling, be it inside sales, that's a critical part. How are you able to deliver and demonstrate projects which are working, again, with customers who are far away? So I think that it's going to be an entire area of reskilling, especially on the aspect of selling, also in terms of R&D and software. So how can we continuously strengthen our entire portfolio? I think on the hiring piece, for us as a company, since we are almost 125 years old, is A lot of it is going to come from new people. So I'm with Uma saying we need to hire more, but these are going to be young graduates who are familiar with digital. It comes ingrained with that. They can be the change agents. It's much easier to get them in rather than trying to reskill everyone. So I think it'll be a combination of both. And given the fact where we are and business is still what it is, I would say a lot more effort on digital transformation, especially in reskilling.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Let's move on. We'll go back to the Slido poll. We got two further questions there, and this next one here. Following the experience of working during the pandemic, do you think that you'll be spending more time on skills-related issues than previously? So that's you individually rather than the organisation itself. And 47% somewhat agree, another 27% somewhat agree. So just under 70% or so think, just around 70% agreeing with that. Does that resonate with you as well? Just to rephrase that, because of the crisis that we've had and the need to sort of focus more on people and so on, do you think that you'll be spending more time with your team and on these type of issues?
Yeah, absolutely. As a leader, I think it's important to think about whether your teams are participating versus engaging. Because in a virtual environment, I think you can end up with a lot of people that are participating. And to Mahesh's point, as we bring in, you call it the digital natives, the younger generation, the way that we need to engage them is actually very different. So we do spend more time now thinking about this, because I think a lot of corporations will agree that they pivoted very quickly and did it very well in terms of work from home and it works, etc. And we're learning some new things, but that was disaster recovery mode. Now, what is it going to look like in an ongoing mode? Because I read, I think in the Fortune 500 CEO survey, that they are saying they expect this to go on for another year. So I think we really need to be thinking about that engagement piece versus the participation piece.
That's a really important point, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Also
Yeah.
on that issue.
No, I think on the engagement piece, I agree with Uma. I think what's happened again in the last 3 months, the fact that a lot of us were at home, it actually enabled me to engage much more with employees than I have. Earlier, you would be traveling, you were stuck with customer meetings, but now we had much more time. And I think that's also come back from a lot of employees that suddenly the senior management is much more accessible, far more available to them. And again, coming back on communication, and like transformation requires communication, this was also a shock for many people, right? It's not an easy one. People are wondering, hey, what is the business? Am I going to come back? What happens to me? What happens to my job? So reassuring them, telling them, hey, things are not all bad. We will recover from this. Communication becomes a very, very critical piece. So in that sense, I think the technology has worked. And indeed, whether it's working from home, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Teams, whatever be it, communication still remained very, very key. And that's what we did. And I think the other piece which we realized, not just beyond employees, is also at customers. Sometimes we tend to forget that our customers are probably even less linked we are, because in the end, we are still multinationals. We have linked to technology. Some of them just have a computer, nothing else. Engaging them was also very, very key. And I think in that sense, we've probably strengthened the loyalty and of the customers, because they had much more information about COVID and how to deal with it than they had in the past. Yeah. So that's helped. And of course, things like webinars make a big difference. Suddenly, we are still, from a knowledge standpoint, continuing to upgrade the knowledge rather than having lost it.
You mentioned remote working now. Both of you mentioned this, and there's a few questions sort of coming in about that as well. How's your experience of that been? Has it fundamentally changed the way that you view the workplace? We're here in the central business district of Singapore. And I know a lot of people are talking about what's the future of this, when we've realised that actually a lot of people can work at home and get a better work-life balance and so on. But what's your experience has been in terms of the organisation? And you were talking there about moving from sort of crisis mode to how is this going to really shape us going forward? On that particular issue of remote working, virtual working, what's changed within VMware, if at all, and how do you see that developing over the next few months, years?
Yeah. I think we are learning a few things. I mean, one is around, despite us pivoting very quickly, in fact, in April, we had the largest software shipment ever. And so, everyone was productive. But as you know, in Asia, for some companies, or most companies, the way we measure productivity would have been how much time are you spending at your desk, and who was sending the email at 10 p.m. or closing the lights in the office. And now the way that we need to measure is around the outcomes. And so that's one piece. Mental health is the other piece that has come up in VMware, which we're paying attention to. And actually in our leadership forum, which we do on a monthly basis for director level and above in Asia, we had one of our employees in Australia talk openly about how he was going through this and was in denial, etc., and how he decided to just talk about it and ask for help. And actually in Asia, despite having employee assistance programs, it's not very well utilized. And so we're making an effort to just, it's okay to actually get help and talk about it and ask for help, which in Asian cultures may be not very well received before. And actually, mental health isn't mental illness. That delineation is important. And then, thinking about our different work environments for everyone, whether it's working moms here in Singapore when home-based learning started, I think quite a few of them struggled in my team.
Yeah.
And everyone was waiting for the schools to open again. And our inside sales teams, a lot of them are very young. They're either living with their families or they're sharing apartments and they only have a room. And that's their work environment for an entire day, not this. And so they struggle with that as well. And so that separation, with the environment you can work in, for me personally, leaving the bedroom in the morning and walking to the dining table is me going to the office. And then shutting down at the dining table and going to the living room is leaving the office. That form of separation, I've started meditating twice a day for my own mental health. As leaders, I think we have to fill our cup and care for ourselves so that we can care for others. So those are some of the things.
Very important point. Actually, the same issue of that sort of, has the experience of the pandemic, is that going to force a sort of a clear change in how people work at Sigma?
I think so. So I think for myself, if I had to say, first of all, travel was probably exaggerated. So I will not probably travel as much as earlier, because you start to realize you can get a lot of work done by not traveling. So I think that's a critical one. I think from an office space standpoint of view, we do realize that certain jobs can still be probably done from home, or for me, it's work from anywhere, right? Sales guys, you have a laptop, you work from the place where you are. But I still believe that the office atmosphere will not completely gone away. I think there is still a lot of strengths in engaging with people. Free flow of ideas, that's very difficult to do on a call, right? It's just the simple social interactions, which are still very, very key. And again, if I go back to interactions with customers or for stakeholders, there is that personal chemistry that is important in a face-to-face or a physical meeting. I think that's also valid for the office. So in my opinion, I think we will strike a balance where there will be probably a few more people working from home or working from anywhere. From a Signify context, I can think that real estate may be optimized. But I still do believe that the working from office still remains, because some of this last 3 months have still proven that going to work, like Umar said, it's not just moving from time to you've gone to a different place of work, your frame of reference is different, your mental equipment is different, so you start to think very differently. So I would still say office going is going to be key in the future. Yeah. But definitely we are finding far more efficient ways of working.
Yeah. It's a whole sort of range of issues that I'm sure we'll be coming back to over the weeks and months and years around work, around the work environment, how we work, what we do, and so on. I'll just take us back to the final part of the Slido poll there, and we asked people to enter in a word. So thinking about talent, tech, and transformation, what one thing will be you be focusing on more as a result of the pandemic? And just to read out some of the responses here: agility, soft skills, empowerment, digitization, transformation, resilience. So osmosis one in there as well. It's an interesting one. But things like agility and people coming out a lot more. So it seems that this is a message that's coming out quite loud and clear. that the crisis has forced us to reevaluate ways in which we work, ways in which we engage with our workforce, with our clients, as well, how we use technology, and we'll be looking to accelerate some of those areas. I've got one or two more questions that I'd like to pose to both of you before I move to our guest, Charles Fine, who's going to be dialing in from Kuala Lumpur just in a couple of minutes. But one of them is we talk about all the great things that have been happening, about the sort of positives of this, and how you're going to what hasn't worked so well, particularly when it comes to sort of people and the pandemic. And secondly, I guess we touched on it a little bit earlier on, but the challenges that you faced in terms of building that future-ready workforce. And the survey is around mindset and so on. So those two key areas. One, what did you find that didn't stand up so well during the pandemic? And secondly, leaving that aside, overcoming that sort of resistance to change, what will you be focusing on going forward? Maybe Mahesh, like
Sure.
you first.
So I think let me start with the first question of what's been challenging during the pandemic. I think the human touch, right? That's been very, very key. That's a piece I've missed quite a bit. I mean, again, it's nice to speak to people over the calls and keep your video on. You still miss that part. I think for me also the fact that in the pandemic we have been very, very focused on operational. I mean, it's more tactical. How do I survive this crisis? Like Umar said, this is survival mode, so survive the crisis. In that sense, we have probably not spent as much time on strategic issues or how do you chart out the future, which we would normally do probably in a work from office situation, right? So I think that's something we need to quickly come back on, because Umar is right. I mean, it's not going to be just 3 months, maybe it's 1 year, 2 years.
Yeah.
We still need to keep our long-term ambitions still going forward. So I would say these two aspects, the fact that when you're at home, you're really focusing on operational issues, that tends to happen. How do you get it back to strategic, and indeed coming back to the human touch?
Yeah.
On your second question in terms of skilling, I think I would put it in 2 parts. First is when we get back to work, right? So key pieces I would still keep into perspective. How do you still bring back engagement? I think because one of the key concerns for most employees coming back is, do I have a safe environment, right? I think that's what, and can I travel safely to work? And that's something we have to think about, and we are. So I think the fact that everybody, probably most companies, have a standard protocol of how safe an office is, we are working on that too. We have one. So if you want an open office, this is the protocol you follow. And you can do very, very simple things like it's not just sanitize and so on, but giving the fact that only the people who need to come to work are the critical jobs. So we do that. And I think it's also about engaging in terms of leadership, right? So for example, when our office opened a couple of weeks back, I had to be the first one to get into work. Important to show the way that this can work. And I think that getting people back to that norm of the crisis is on, but it's starting to get over. You have to get them past.
Yeah.
Because if you still let them be in the situation where the pandemic is still on, people don't move. So we are in that position where we're saying, okay, now start getting ready for the future, start coming back to work, start to get a slightly different life from what you had before.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Uma, same thing with you.
So I spoke about one of the challenges in terms of how do we really ascertain if employees are engaged versus participating. That was certainly something we picked up. And mental health, I mean, I had 3 on my leadership team that I needed to get across as well. And, just navigating that and making sure we're bringing in the right resources, etc. And also I think there was a sense when we all pivoted to work from home that there was this sense about needing at the ground level to send emails, to show up, because you can't physically be seen to be doing the work. And one of the things that we had to do at VMware as part of our learning was make sure that as leaders, we're really focusing on the big rocks and what outcomes we want to achieve versus just measuring productivity about time spent. And as we think about the future, we are looking at Work 2.0 differently. And it's in 3 areas. So firstly, around the workforce itself, and that's all about driving engagement. So how do we think about learning and development differently, etc. The second piece is around the workplace. What would our future offices look like? Will there be as many offices? what would collaboration spaces look like, etc. And then lastly, it's the work itself and productivity. And this is where we're thinking more about the systems and technologies that can help support our employees. Yeah.
Okay, so I think a clear message there, I think, about we need to move beyond the sort of crisis mode, dealing with everything, to adjusting to a new reality and making sure that we don't lose sight of the strategic imperatives of the business, the vision of the business, and leading that from the front. Thank you very much indeed, Mahesh, Uma, for being here and sharing some thoughts and helping us to digest some of the learnings from the paper as well. I'm going to invite our next speaker to join us now. Charles Fine is the CEO, Professor and Dean of the Asia School of Business that's based in Kuala Lumpur, and also the sponsor of this research this year. So thank you very much indeed for the support of the research. Charles, hopefully you've been able to listen in to the discussions that we've had here, very wide-ranging, from tech, talent to COVID and responses to all of that. I wonder if I could come to you and first of all get your thoughts and comments on that, and then secondly, given your role at business school here in Asia, and of course engaging with executives and helping them as they reimagine their workforce as well, focus a little bit more on the sort of skills training aspects of some of the discussions that we've had this morning. So Charles, hopefully you're there.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you, and great discussion. And thank you to Mahesh and Uman for the insights. I guess one comment I would have is that I think from both of the speakers, we heard that there's a need for both what we might call smart skills, that is, skills related to organization, team, critical thinking, etc., as well as what we call sharp skills, or understanding digital technologies, understanding how to use statistics and analytics, and make best use of the technology. So there's seems to be this need for a balance between and a combination of the people skills, if you will, and the technology skills, and that seems to be a common theme, and it's a common theme in what we see in our own educational processes, that we can't expect to just teach the analytical tools, the sharp skills, or the people skills, the smart skills. We really have to do both, and it's the balance that people have to be open to learning and working together, and also be able to use the modern tools, if you will, of analytics. So that seemed to be one common theme that we heard. And it reminds me, about 9 years ago, there was a book written called "The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom." Many of you may remember the Tiger Mom book. And in that book, the author, who was a Yale professor, boasted about how she trained her children in some sense in the sharp skills. She had them focus on mathematics and history and studies, but she didn't allow them to go out in social events or go to parties, because she thought that was a waste of time. And there was a lot of criticism of that book in saying, well, you're too one-sided, that it's much harder for someone to master the dynamics of going to a overnight slumber party than it is to master mathematics. And people need to learn how to interact with others and how to work together in teams. And I think actually that's one thing that maybe wasn't talked about so much this morning, is how much work needs to be done in teams versus how much work gets done by individuals. And I think we find in the work that we do with many companies, teams and learning to work in teams and coping now with digital teams is a critical skill.
So can I sort of jump in on that a little bit more, because the importance of soft skills, of people skills, of interaction and so on, of team building, clearly comes through in this report and others that we've done as well, as you were just highlighting. So how do we go about doing that in this new environment where maybe people aren't in the office so much, and maybe also thinking about yourselves as a business school, because part of the attraction is that you bring people together, you create networks in person as well. So two questions there.
One, I guess, more general about how companies can go about helping to develop those people skills in this type of environment. And then secondly, what's your experience been of that at Asia School of Business?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer those in reverse order because what we find is, so our curriculum is 1/3 of the time the students spend in what we call action learning projects. That is, projects working with companies in teams where they live on site with the companies using the tools that they learn in the classroom. And so we emphasize those skills quite a bit in terms of teamwork and what we call the SMART skills. What we found when COVID struck is that we had to move those projects to digital mode. That is, we had a bunch of student teams working on projects with companies, and all of a sudden everybody had to go home and work from there. And what we found is that that the students, having in some sense mastered the ability to work in teams, were able to maintain that capability even when they went to digital and engage the corporate partners. That in fact, even though people were at home, there was still a thirst for collaboration, a thirst for working together, a thirst for exchange of ideas, and that once you had established a relationship with people in the group, it wasn't that hard in some sense to continue those conversations, continue the brainstorming, continue to work together. So what we found is that our students with that capability can help catalyze that in organizations as well, that they see how our students have learned to work in teams, and when they're engaged in a team with those people who have that predilection, and our students tend to be young and more the digital natives types, it helps draw in the people in our corporate partners to, in some sense, learn and grow together with the students. So we see there's a synergy there, and I think organizations need to cultivate that. They need to cultivate the habits of working together, working in teams, collaboration, so that when the pandemic strikes, if you will, there's already a pattern and a habit of working together, and it makes it easier to move to the digital platforms.
Thank you. And the second part of the question was around ASB itself and how you've adjusted to that.
Yeah. So as mentioned, so we moved our projects to digital. So our students continue their projects, but on digital. In terms of our own organization, we're at the limit of Zoom fatigue, perhaps. That is, we have a lot of different teams working on a lot of different aspects of our program, and we've moved them all to Zoom meetings, and I think that's gone reasonably well. There is a challenge to make sure that everybody's engaged, as Uman mentioned. Make sure everybody stays connected, dealing with the stresses and the mental health, the work from home challenges. For some people, we find the introverts maybe love working from home, and the extroverts miss the human contact, and we have to try to help everybody along to keep them connected. I'd also mention another point that Uman made, which relates to diversity. That we find our students come from over 30 different countries. Our faculty come from over 15 different countries. We have a roughly 60-40 gender balance, so not quite 50-50, but we're close in terms of students as well as actually our staff is 60-40 women to men. Our students are 60-40 men to women. But the diversity in terms of ethnicity, in terms of race, in terms of nationality, in terms of gender, really helps the stimulation of ideas and the catalyzation of how do we think about adjusting, how do we work differently, how do we work better. You get a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ideas, and we find that's been quite helpful in making this transition.
Yeah. If we could take you back to a couple of points that were raised in the paper around driving the transformation, resistance that people find, and ways in which they can overcome those challenges as well. Now, at Asia School of Business, you do work with the C-suite, you do work with the organisations as well. But I wonder if you could give us a sense of how you help business leaders to overcome those challenges or those resistance to change that they face as they're looking to drive a digital transformation, as they're looking to reimagine the business model of an organization. Mahesh was talking earlier on about the sort of shift from selling light bulbs to selling services and everything around that as well, and how that drove the change of the workforce, the structure of the workforce, how they engage with clients and internally as well. So how do you particularly help C-suite business leaders with those challenges?
So I think resistance to change is a fairly natural human reaction, that people get comfortable with what works for them, and when they're pushed to change, sometimes there is resistance. I think what we found is that learning by example is critical. So if you see other people reacting positively to the change, you see other people able to adapt, it makes it easier to help the people who feel greater resistance to see, oh, there is a path. We can give one example from our faculty, that we had one faculty member who said, I absolutely cannot teach online. I only can teach in person. I do a great job. I don't want to mess it up by trying to teach online. And he was pushed and nudged and encouraged, and he tried it, and he learned that he could teach just as well online as he could teach in person. And furthermore, he became an advocate for online teaching. He started telling the other faculty, oh, I can teach online and it works well, and here's how I did it, and here's the tricks I learned. And so you got someone who was resistant to change to then becoming an advocate for change, because they had been able to, they had been coached around that corner, if you will. And so in some sense, showing people examples of how the change can happen, providing, and I think even all the way up to the C-suites, they both have to, they sometimes have to take the plunge and be the examples to show others that this change is possible. And I think we saw that, for example, Mahesh talking about how he changes the way he works, less travel, etc., encourages everyone else to say, oh, if the CEO can do it, I can do it as well. And so there has to be some encouragement, some nudging, some pushing, and then lots of examples of that other people can follow.
I think that came through very clearly from Mahesh and Uma as well, that leading from the front, demonstrating success and communicating that, very important. I wonder if I could just sort of shift attention a little bit, because quite clearly in the paper and then in the follow-up poll that we just did, it seems that people are much more interested in or talking about investing more in skills, training and development. But it might be that that training is going to have to change in some way. What do you hear from your clients, and taking your clients to be organisations, to be people who take executive education classes and so on? What are you hearing anything in terms of the type of training and development that they want now, and has that changed somewhat as a result of the COVID crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's no single uniform response. I mean, we have some clients who are resistant to change, and they say, we only like in-person workshops, we want in-person teaching, executive education without the in-person touch is not what we believe in, and so we want to wait until things open up more. We have others who say, we embrace the change, we realize we have to go to more digital learning, we need to learn how to master the digital platforms, and we're willing to experiment. We're willing to try digital learning, digital classrooms, digital executive education, digital team projects. And so we are probably spending more time with the leading thinkers in that space and saying, all right, we're going to work with you, we'll run experiments with you, we'll figure out how to optimize that. And the ones who are more resistant, we'll have to show them the examples that we were able to be successful with the companies that were more willing to jump ahead. And I think there are quite a few players in both camps, and the ones that are willing to jump ahead, I think, are going to move farther and faster, more quickly, I'd encourage people to accept that the world has changed. It won't go completely back to the way it was, and you have to take the plunge at some point and say we're willing to try these new platforms and these new ways of learning and growing.
Yeah, again, it seems to sort of echo the comments that we had here with Mahesh and Uma about realizing that things have changed and that we need to move beyond the sort of firefighting to adopt into a new reality and shaping that new reality as well for the individual, for the company, and making sure they're putting in place the type of structures, in this case, training development, that's going to be required. I wonder if I could take you back to some of the sort of specific skills and attributes in our survey. And again, just to remind everybody, we ran the survey just before the crisis sort of broke. We asked people what skills and attributes were most valued. And on one of the charts in the paper, the ability to work in virtual teams was rated as least important. What else have you seen sort of change? What do you think is, in terms of skills and development and attributes, what do you think are going to become more important as we move forward over the coming months and years?
So I think also just the willingness to adapt, the willingness to be flexible, right? So COVID was an unexpected crisis, but it won't be the last one. And I don't think many people will argue that the rate of change in this world is going to slow down, and that people do need to grow into feeling more comfortable with change, with experimentation, with a willingness to try new things. So today it's virtual teams, but tomorrow may be something else. And so the most critical thing is to grow the organization as an organization that accepts flexibility and adaptability and change as the norm. And so if you grow the organization that way, then you get less resistant to change more generally. In our own organization, the Asia School of Business, we do a reorg roughly once a year. And people have gotten used to the fact that, all right, the organization is going to change again. We're going to restructure. We're going to shuffle up where people are working and what jobs they have, not just for the sake of change, but for the sake of continuous improvement. We learn something every year, and we want to maximize the benefit of that learning. We have to change the organization and change what some people do. And so just building that as a part of the culture, that change is part of organizational life, I think is quite critical.
One area that I'd like to explore a little bit with you, Charles, before we move towards the end of this session, we heard from Uma and Mahesh about the huge geographies that they cover, right the way from Japan out to the Middle East, to Asia, Pacific, Africa, and so on. And you yourself, MIT Sloan professor of management there, but now in Asia, and you have, from your vantage point there, you can look across the high growth markets traditionally of China, for example, and Southeast Asia, and you've also got the more conservative developed markets of places like Japan as well. Given that sort of geographical spread that you have experience of, how do you see different places reacting to the sort of needs of this new normal?
Well, so I think, as you know, it's important to recognize the variability and the variety of business cultures and business needs across geographies, right? So Asia is clearly not one culture, not one nation state. Asia is highly diverse, and as the Asia School of Business, we try to represent that diversity in our student body, our faculty, our curriculum, etc. And also being tightly connected with MIT, we sort of try to stay connected to the Western side as well. I think what's critical for businesses is to learn and become familiar with local cultures and local understanding. So I was talking to one bank president in one of the countries in Southeast Asia, and he said, we do business in 26 different countries, but all of our people are of the same nationality, that is from our home country. And I asked him, well, how do you train people and prepare them to go work in these 26 different countries? And he said, well, we don't. We just send them, and then they have to figure it out. And I think we can do better than that. I think that we can prepare people to work in these different countries. We can prepare people to understand differences in cultures so that they go in with a full set of tools when they move to a different country or culture, and they just have a much broader end tool set. I think that's critical. That to recognize the diversity, not kind of try to homogenize in any way, shape, or form.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because diversity is a word that's come up quite repeatedly this morning. We're talking about tech and talent, so maybe it's naturally there. But I'm quite surprised, maybe encouraged at the amount that word has come out, and maybe this also this experience that we've all gone through helps us to realise that diversity can really help us strengthen our organisations and bringing new thinking and help us to become more resilient, more agile, and so on. Charles, we've just got a few minutes left, so I wonder if I could just ask you for final comment. Is there anything in the paper that you've come across or the discussion that we've had this morning that's really stood out for you in terms of this sort of fundamental issue of building that future-ready workforce? Sure.
So I think, first of all, we have to recognize the immensity of the challenge that businesses face, that we can maybe put in simple adages what's needed. We need people with certain skills. We need people with technological savvy. We need people. We need diverse teams, etc. But saying it and doing it are two very different things. That the doing it is often hard work. I think both Mahesh and Uman, they talked about their great successes, but we can be sure that there's a huge amount of hard work and many years of laying the foundation to build the capabilities for their organizations to be successful as they are. And so I think one of the observations has to be that even though we are faced with very sharp turns, that is, things change rapidly, companies do have to play the long game. Play the long game means you have to be building and investing in capabilities day in and day out, not just wait for when all of a sudden there's a storm and we have to prepare for the storm. In some sense, you need to be preparing over long periods, investing in your people, investing in capabilities, keeping an eye out for what the changes are that you're going to need to cope with, and building the resilience into organizations beforehand. So you can't decide overnight, oh, now we need to be diverse, let's go hire make a few diversity hires. It has to be a strategy over a long period.
Charles, thank you very much for those final thoughts. And I think exactly right to be focusing on that longer term, and it takes time to build the type of team that you want. So start now and accelerate your activities, I think, is something that's come across. So Charles, thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to bring the session to a close by wrapping up and highlighting some of the points that we've looked at. And as I look back over my notes again, I just mentioned diversity as one of the big issues there. Uma, it struck me, not participation, but engagement. I think one of the interesting there's for Mahesh, that whole issue of a business model transformation and what that means in bringing the workforce along, and how you do that, build, borrow, buy, and investing for the longer term as well. And I guess in short, this whole experience of the COVID crisis has really highlighted the need for that resilience to really understand your workforce as well and know where some of the stresses are. And we've learned that. We should be building on that. We should be making the appropriate decisions, maybe arguing for more investment, maybe focusing a bit more time on training and development, perhaps on mental health issues, recognizing the challenges that people might have from non-traditional working environments, i.e. working at home and so on. All of these issues, of course, we'll be coming back to on our regular program at the Economist Corporate Network. These are themes that we look at all the time. We're always very happy to hear from you, our members, on this as well. Hopefully you can see a slide on the screen as well, which just directs you to the paper, which, as I mentioned, was sponsored by Asia School of Business and is available for download from today. There will be some smaller sessions taking place in Tokyo, Seoul and Shanghai in the coming couple of weeks as well, to discuss these issues with a much more sort of local flavour as well. And finally, just before we wrap up, I should note that we have one more event today, so it's a bumper day for ECN members. We have a session looking at navigating the new Cold War, so a complete change of gears, or maybe not completely, because technology is a major component of all of this. So we have Dr. Alan Dupont, who's a research fellow at the Heinrich Foundation. He's just released a new paper looking at mitigating the new Cold War, US-China trade and technology. Dane Komuro, who's a partner for Asia Pacific at Control Risks, and John Penrice, President Asia Pacific of Dow Chemical. And that's 4 o'clock this afternoon. It's a Zoom meeting at Singapore time. So finally, with that, I'd just like to thank all of you for joining us this morning, for investing a little bit of time with us to talk about these issues around talent, tech and technology, and in particular thanking our guests today, Mahesh and Uma, for coming in on this terrible rainy day in Singapore to share some thoughts. So thank you very much indeed, and I wish you every success with your business.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Goodbye.